Hi, this is Jay Beeks. This topic is ethnography and sustainability, why one for the other. I'm going to be talking today about why I chose ethnography for um, my topic, which has to do with sustainability. Specifically, my topic is what are the psychological factors leading to science denial and opposition to sustainable leadership? One of the things that's fairly noteworthy about this topic is that you can see there's a lot of variability of the research. Certain topics such as science denial, psychological factors, sustainability, and leadership, they all have a certain amount of complexity to them. So just the subject of science denial or just the subject of leadership or just the subject of sustainability could take me in different directions. And I need to be careful as part of the research process to make sure that I'm not pulled off into too many directions. So a methodology such as ethnography, which is one of the qualitative research methods, has the potential for providing the kind of research methodology that I need for this particular topic. It affords a wide open topic, and I believe that a wide open topic needs this type of a research method. As we get into a little bit more about ethnography, we'll see why it appears to be a method that is suitable for this particular topic. So why the ethnography approach? First of all, it allows for a broadly stated mandate. It's also applicable to cultural studies and cultural themes and social structures. So what appeals to me about this is that I see a culture out there that is in the process of denying climate science and the idea that mankind has an impact on our climate and a change in our climate. So I believe there's a culture that is wrapped around this thought process, and I don't know what that culture is, but I'm interested in finding out more about it. And initially, my thought process was that if I was to use an ethnographic approach, I could actually become part of that culture, perhaps interview those that belong to that culture and get the kind of information out of them I need. In addition to that, we can see that ethnography is a methodology that's useful for studying cultural change and political discourse. And it's well known that ethnography is a worldview, wide-angle view type of a research methodology. And I believe because of this, it also deals well with complexity. Therefore, it allows for construction of the entire phenomena. I also believe this applies to sustainability. This subject requires transdisciplinarity for sure, the perspective of competing disciplines. And there's also a need for flexibility to move into other areas. Sustainability means different things to different people, and it can be discipline specific. So for example, the discipline of ecology has one definition for sustainability. Economics has another definition for sustainability. Environmental science another, and environmental law another. Each of these disciplines have competing definitions of what sustainability is, and I find that this fact alone makes it difficult to complete the research unless you've got the right methodology. And ethnography also provides a holistic portrait of groups and an ability to learn from within certain groups. So when would one select this method? A few that seem to cry out for this are those problems that involve complexity and diversity is apparent. So if construction in the entirety is needed, this is another reason why you might choose this method. Also, if you have a real-world setting and you have the ability to move into that setting and perform the research from within inside a cultural group, that would be another reason why you might want to choose ethnography. Again, it's a holistic approach, and if a holistic portrait is advantageous to your desired outcome, then this is another reason for choosing this method. As a final point here, you're also getting the insider's point of view, and that is advantageous under certain situations. For example, if you're within inside of a particular culture, you're hearing their opinions, their discussions, and you're able to take these as part of your research and make them your own, so to speak. So what is the expected outcome of this type of research? Well, for one thing, you are expected to have a detailed, in-depth description of the culture, individual or group practice. So because ethnographic studies often involve full immersion and fairly long study periods, you're able to get perhaps a little bit more in-depth with this type of methodology as compared to some of the others. In addition, you're determining cultural constructs, or what's often referred to as webs of meaning. And this kind of in-depth immersion facilitates this ability to better understand these social constructs. You're also getting an internal perspective not available by other means. This is one advantage of ethnography. You're really becoming part of the culture, you're one of them, and you're getting knowledge because of a trust factor that may not be available to you with other types of methodologies. You're also getting new ways of thinking about things that may seem now as all too familiar. So final outcomes with this type of a methodology are that you need to justify your study, you need to come up with a description of the group, also a method of the study, and ultimately evidence and findings. So what are we actually coming up with this type of a methodology? Are we coming up with a theory, a story, or description? In my opinion, ethnography provides a description, but it doesn't mean it doesn't also provide a story. So research aspects included in ethnography are the justification for the study, the description of the group and method of study, the evidence to support the researcher's claims, and the findings to the research question. But more specifically, the aim of ethnography is to describe a particular phenomenon of cultural change, context, and that type of thing. But you are ultimately getting a description of the group, or you're describing a particular phenomenon. I also believe that with historical research as part of your ethnographic study, that you're getting a story as well. But I think the main thing you're focusing on is the description. What are the procedures involved with ethnography? Well, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, this does involve full immersion in the group or culture, and that's needed for a holistic big picture view. The researcher must develop a rapport with the participants and build trust. This type of rapport is better established with that full immersion. And as we know, ethnographic studies can take years, several years, at least several months to require that kind of full immersion in order to be able to build up that trust. It's often referred to as participant observation, with the researcher being one of the observed. Therefore, the participant is observing him or herself as part of the study. Some of the other practices or procedures that are used are targeted interviews with specific individuals, and they're often with open-ended questions. You're also going to take this information, which is compiled in various means, accumulate it, compile it, code it, and then ultimately you're going to interpret the data. The data collection methods include, again, this full immersion, which is required for the establishment of the rapport and the trust. And then you'll begin by observing the group or the culture from within. In addition to that, you're going to be taking other types of observations, which could include video or sound recordings, and you're going to be finding methods and means to get a more detailed observation of individuals and group activities. Ultimately, you're trying to better understand this culture. This could include detailed observation notes. It could include surveys, individual interviews, memos on observations, and so on. So what are the evaluation criteria? Well, one author, Richardson, provides 5 criteria, and these really apply to the finished study. So from Richardson's standpoint, he was looking at the 5 criteria for judging the adequacy of an ethnographic study after it's completed. The first of them is called substantive contribution, therefore contributing to our understanding of social life. The second is the aesthetic merit. Therefore, is this study aesthetically successful? The third is reflexivity, and this has to do with whether or not the observer has adequate self-awareness and self-exposure. The fourth category or criteria from Richardson is impact. So does this study affect me, or does it move me? Is there some way that as I'm reading this study, it motivates me to move in a certain direction? Does it draw my attention? That type of thing. And finally, does the study express a reality? So is it true, credible, and real? These are all the criteria provided by Richardson, and you could say that they're ways to calibrate the validity of a particular study. So what are some examples of the research subjects? Well, historically, the research subjects have been what researchers have been calling primitive or aboriginal cultures. Typically, they were anthropology studies, and as I've looked into studies that have been completed over the years, they go back to the late 19th century, and they're often with researchers that are going to distant land where they don't have any real idea of the culture. The culture is completely foreign to them compared to the culture that they've come from. So they're observing the culture from their own fairly unique perspective. In addition to this, it can also include cultures and groups that are in isolation, groups with unique behaviors, and cultures undergoing transition. One of the more common uses of ethnographic studies is for cultures undergoing transition. In my case, I believe I'm looking more at groups with unique behaviors. So I'm looking at cultures that are involved in a particular thought process, certain thought patterns and patterns of behavior that are interesting to me, that I think make them somewhat unique as a study group. The problem is, for me at least, is finding what those study groups are. So who are some of the leading scholars on this? Well, as it turns out, there's quite a few. I've listed a few here. There's Fetterman, Atkinson, Madison, Madden, Denson, Lincoln, Cresswell, Thomas, Tedlock, Richardson, and so on, Geertz and Gobo. One of the better resources I've been able to find was Ethnography, Step by Step, and then the Handbook of Ethnography. I also thought that doing critical ethnography and the Handbook of Qualitative Research were good resources as well. But there's really a wealth of information on this, and I found it to be somewhat overwhelming and found myself drawn more to the articles and journal articles as opposed to the books. So what are some examples of studies that have used this approach? Well, one of the ones that's fairly old is called Argonauts of the Western Pacific by Malinowski. One that's quite well known is called Coming of Age in Samoa by Margaret Mead. And more recently, Mary Bateson was the author of The Lele of the Kasai. So advantages of using this method. Well, it's not common for ethnographers to spend, it is not uncommon for ethnographers to spend over a year collecting data on a particular study. That's one of the advantages of this process. So if the researcher has the luxury and the availability to spend that much time in a particular culture, as you can imagine, you can learn quite a bit from a culture by having that kind of length of study. So this kind of in-depth combination of immersion, observation, interviews, and survey provides a high level of detail and a unique yet thorough perspective. What are some of the disadvantages of this method? Well, it's quite possible for a researcher to lose objectivity during a study and to become either too much a part of a culture or unable to detach from previously established biases. Of course, I think you could say this about most studies. Any form of research is going to be prone to bias, and checks and balances have to be put in place to try to prevent this. There are various ways to perform ethnographic studies that allow for this kind of check and balance system. But the relationship between the writer, the audience, and the subject has been a concern with this type of study and has a potential for influence such as political that are called into question the subjectivity of those groups being studied. There are several variations of this method. The four that I was able to find with a little bit of research were bioconfessional, which is intentionally exposing the nature of the research. This may be a bit of a check and balance in itself because you're letting it be known what you're researching up front. Another variation is reflexive ethnography. You're translating the cultural differences by representing the effects on the researcher. A third method is experimental ethnography, therefore incorporating literary theory and philosophy. And a fourth is collaborative ethnography. You're actively involving the subject into the research. And as you can imagine with this fourth method, having the subject participate in, know about the research, understand the initiation of the research and what the outcomes are hoped to be, can be beneficial in several ways. Although as I look at that, I could see where there might be some room for some bias on the part of the observer being pulled into the subject as well. Ethnography has a lot to do with the state of mind of the ethnographer, which calls into question objectivity and who is observing who. So this brings in the discussion about some of the philosophical assumptions pertaining to this type of a research method. There's actually quite a few that could be brought in to help maintain the objectivity and help the ethnographer better understand exactly what he or she is looking at. As we all know, we can look at things through rose-colored glasses, and sometimes we're seeing things that another person would see completely different. So some of the philosophical assumptions that come into play here are postmodernism, post-structuralist thoughts, deconstructive theories, and social construction theories. I think these are just a few of the philosophical approaches impacting the practice of ethnography. So where am I now with my research? Well, as I looked at this type of qualitative research, and I started thinking about a full immersion type of study, I realized that this may not be the ideal approach for me with my particular topic. One of the challenges I have with my topic is that I don't believe there's exactly one or two cultural groups that I can get involved with. I think there could be at least 6, maybe even a dozen cultural groups that would need this kind of in-depth study. But one of the main advantages is being able to more fully understand a culture by essentially becoming a part of that culture. So I can see that ethnography has that advantage. However, with my topic, I just don't see the ease for getting that done. I could see spending years as part of a data accumulation process, and frankly, I don't have that much time available to me to complete my dissertation. However, I definitely see the value of this. So what I'm looking at more is more of a theoretical research process. The difficulty of this kind of qualitative research method is daunting, frankly. And a full immersion involvement in one culture is one thing. However, with multiple cultures, there's really a challenge in getting that done. It may require the kind of research where there's a team, maybe 6 or a dozen individuals that are each immersing themselves in separate cultures and then pulling all that information together at the end. However, as one person working on this dissertation topic, I can see that I just don't have that kind of availability. So this is leading me more to a theoretical research process, and I do think that I'm fortunate to have a wealth of literature to draw upon in order to complete that theoretical research. So the conclusions about this type of a methodology. Well, ethnographic research has evolved considerably over the last century, and it has a positive impact on several academic disciplines. One of the main advantages of this kind of research is the wide open approach, which allows for a kind of catch-all research opportunity. The subject of sustainability, with all of its complexity, lends itself well to this kind of research methodology. So I definitely see the advantages of this methodology as a type of qualitative research. I also see that there are some disadvantages, and the biggest disadvantage really has to do with the potential time involved in this full immersion process, where you're actually immersing yourself within a culture for long periods of time in order to gather the data. Understandably, not all full immersion processes require a year or 2 years. However, the biggest challenge I have with my particular topic is I do see at least a half dozen cultures that are part of this science denial culture, and I do not believe that it's reasonable or practical for me to complete this type of a research for my particular topic at this point in time. That concludes my presentation, and thank you all very much for listening in if you got a chance, and I'll see you all online. Thanks again.